I'm happiest in the saddle.
A fellow sportsman.
I am an FBI agent!
Great Scott!
What do you say we cut the chit-chat? A-hole!
Dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria!
Come with me if you want to live.
Hello, and welcome to Retro Ramble. I'm Charlie McGee.
I'm George McGee.
And this time, dear Ramblers, we are retro rambling all the way back to 1999 to review The Mummy, the first one. I feel like I have to throw that in there, the first one, because this is a film that has been recently remade. Is that right, George?
Yes, well, fairly recently, but still, I think I want to say 2017.
Yeah,
so that's still a while ago now.
Yeah. So, but no, we are reviewing the original, should we say? Even though it's even though it's borrowing from a number of genres. And is this a remake itself of?
Yeah, first Mummy was from, I want to say, like 1932, something like that. So a long time ago.
So
yes.
Featuring Brendan Fraser, Rachel Weisz, who else?
John Hannah.
Yeah, of course, John Hannah. Yeah, bodies are washing up cloth. And then a few other well-known character actors of the late 90s, which we will get to. Who directed this puppy?
So this is Stephen Sommers. So this is probably his biggest claim to fame, but we'll go into some of the stuff he's done before and then what he would go on to do. But sadly, he hasn't really done much in the past few years, I would say.
Did see that he sung the theme tune, wrote the theme tune.
Yes, this is written and directed by Stephen Sommers.
And screenplay.
Yeah.
It was, is that the same as writing?
Yeah.
But there was a few, I saw his name, me again. Who's doing the credits? That's also me. Back to me. Yeah.
Based on melodies hummed by Stephen Sommers.
But no, we're going to have a lot of fun with this because this was a big film for George and I back in the 90s. Summer
of 99. What a summer for movies.
Yeah, and I think, as you've probably guessed by now, we're at 130-something episodes. The 90s was a big time for George and I in terms of film, hitting our stride, as it were. So, George, we should warn people who've decided this episode to be their first what to expect from a typical episode of Retro Ramble.
Yes, so Retro Ramble, we are an independent film podcast. So Charlie and I are brothers, and our purpose of this podcast is to go back and look at the films of our youth and look at what made them so great, why we remember them so fondly. Do they still hold up? Is it nostalgia weaving its magic? Have they been remade, spun off, turned into a Netflix series? So yeah, it's a light-hearted look back, and it's not an in-depth critical review, but you will hopefully learn something along the way. There might be some childish impressions, there might be some mild swearing, but ultimately we just want you to be entertained.
And as it's a 90s film, there might be some casual racism, as there was in this film.
It was fine at the time.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that, George. So without further ado, let's get into it. It's 1999. You're disappointed by Star Wars, but you've got The Mummy to watch. And what else was out that year? You said it was a
Matrix.
Of course.
Fight Club.
Yeah. Wow.
They're the main ones I remember. But yeah, it was a big summer for movies.
Movies. Oh, and Deep Blue Sea. No, that was
Deepest
that
Bluest. I think that was 97, 98.
I don't know. I feel like it was all the same sort of.
Was this one of your 5 DVDs?
I think these are one of the first 5 DVDs.
We'll get into it.
That I owned.
Did I mention about my 5 first DVDs? Yes, Charlie.
Sure,
many.
Well, this is for the first time listener. Okay. Are you ready with the trailer? Do I need to share my screen? I've already shared the screen with you.
Damn it. Yes, just bear with me.
Many men have wasted their lives in the foolish pursuit of Hamunaptra. Most
have never returned.
I think you found something.
I call it the doorway to hell.
You have unleashed the creature that we have feared for more than 3,000 years. Is the bringer of death. He will never stop.
This summer, Universal Pictures invites you on an extraordinary adventure beyond life and time. Come now!
Come on!
Why did I not say The Mummy?
Are we supposed to? The Mummy. There you go. Yeah, typical 90s trailer, I guess.
I guess. I mean, it's got all the quick cuts. It's got
Sorry, George is still struggling with the fact that the name of the movie wasn't said at the end of the trailer.
I mean, I just have needs.
Okay, well, before we get into my remembrance of this film, what's this film to you, George?
Strangely, I'd say, it was summer of '99, and usually the first two films that people think of when you say '99 are it's either Matrix or it's Phantom Menace. And the Phantom Menace, the hype, Star Wars, it's hard to put into words the hype that everyone had for that film, the marketing behind it, the partnerships, the promotional tie-ins. So yeah, it was quite hard for other films to break out, but I think this is when, in my sort of movie geek phase, I was I think I was buying Empire monthly, and so I was, I had an idea of what other films were coming out, and yeah, trailers like that made it look really exciting and cool and Indiana Jonesy. So I have vague recollections of you, me, and our friend Peter going to see this at the cinema together. And I think we saw it at least once, maybe probably, I want to say at least twice at the cinema.
This is a very vivid film for me. I think it was surprising. I don't know if even back then when you're reading about Empire, you were probably, we really need to go and see this movie. But we didn't know anybody was, I mean, we knew about Brendan Fraser, I think at this point had he been in that film about the family trapped underground for a while and then he comes up?
Blast from the Past. I'm not sure if that one was, I think that might be after this.
Welcome.
But no, obviously George of the Jungle had been out.
That's what I mean, yeah.
But I think it was just one of those films that despite the hype of Star Wars, it still managed to stand out as we've got to go and see that movie. And as you said, without, I'm sure we'll get around to doing Phantom Menace at some point. We haven't worked out our plan for approaching Star Wars yet. But whereas Phantom Menace was pretty much, outside of some amazing standout action sequences, was overall a bit of a disappointment and just didn't live up to the hype. I kind of feel like The Mummy did live up to the hype.
Well, I can't remember the hype. So yeah, I'll take your word on that. All I know is what's post-hype called? I was just so happy with this film. I think for me, we'd had, I can't remember the year, we'd had Last Crusade. Was it 93, 95? When was it?
No, Last Crusade was the last sort of, it seems like maybe it's the end of a decade, but it was summer of 89, which was...
Oh my God, so we had been waiting 10 years. Okay.
So Batman, Lethal Weapon 2 and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. So that was a big summer. And Ghostbusters 2, I want to say, maybe?
Yeah, but they all looked like the most contemporary versions of their originals, so even Ghostbusters 2 was look, here it is with latest groundbreaking special effects, all of those films. Same with Indiana Jones. Here's Indiana Jones with better effects and Sean Connery. It's so my point is we've been waiting a while, we said, the hunger for an Indiana Jones type film was there, and this film came and delivered in spades.
It's funny though. I was thinking about this because I was thinking, how do it kind of bottles so much magic. And yes, it's clearly wearing its Indiana Jones inspirations up front, loud and proud. And I think Stephen Summers, that's part of his pitch. He was like, it's Indiana Jones meets the Mummy sort of type adventure. But thinking about it, and I was thinking maybe that's what makes it so romantic and fun, like we said with the magic of Indiana Jones, is the period piece. But it's funny, I was thinking back to other films in the 90s that were trying to either copy Batman or a little bit of Indiana Jones that were period pieces that just didn't really make a hit at the box office. So there was The Rocketeer, which was I think 1990. There was
which we are big fans of, by the way.
We're big fans of The Rocketeer, and we will do it at some point. And that is another great sort of Indiana Jones-esque adventurer.
I'd say that falls more into the B movie. I know it was probably billed higher, but I feel for some reason I put The Mummy on a higher pedestal, even though I really, really like The Rocketeer.
Yeah, there was the Shadow with Eric Bowie. That was, I want to say 94. That was like set in the 30s. There was what's he called? The Phantom with Billy Zane.
Oh my God, you and I were starting to take the piss out of films, I think, when that came out.
Yes, and I think we do need to cover that at some point because it is
anything with Billy Zane in, anything.
So bad it's good, and it's got a very lovable hammy performance by Treat Williams, who's connected to this because he was in Deep Rising, which we'll get to. So yeah, it's basically, I think it's quite hard to manage that balance of genres like this film does, but it is, as what all Hollywood executives like. It's a 4-quadrant picture, baby. It's got action, it's got romance, it's got comedy, it's got horror.
Yeah, and I was thinking to myself, can I watch this with my son who was 8? And then I was like, even I remembered about the Scarabs, the Beatles. I was like, no.
It's really pushing that 12A or 12 back then rating. It's really pushing it. And I remember being a bit squeamish about the Scarabs when I watched it first time around. Like, ooh.
It's the noise. But I love this film for, yes, as you say, wearing its Indiana Jones on its sleeve. But I like the fact that, and this would never happen today, nobody's got a backstory. Nobody has. And I think we've talked about it many times on this podcast. And we talked about, obviously we'll get into detail on the wonder of that is Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz and John Hannah. But character actors.
Yeah.
In this film, like the four Yanks that end up being dead meat, we've seen at least one of them in a lot of other stuff. And all the others, they all hold their own, so I thought that for me, whenever we go back to these 90s films, it's the character actors for me that stand out because you're like, oh, you were in so many other things. And now they just be pigeoned. They're probably, oh yeah, he's in that streaming show. It's like I really feel like character actors of the 90s were bringing so much more than just TV. They were a level above TV actors.
Yeah.
Whereas the line has become somewhat blurred these days.
Oh, absolutely blurred these days.
Put Emilia Clarke in the Terminator film. She's so hot now.
You'll never let that go.
She can't act. Anyway, what else? So that was First Memories, and I didn't even talk about my DVDs. Have we got time? Can I just tell everybody this was in my first ever owned 5 DVDs?
And what were let's just remind people what the 5 DVDs were, Charlie.
Well, I mean, if you want to go all the way back to pre-DVD, pre-PlayStation 2 times when I was playing DVDs
watching on your Mac,
on my compact PC, I think that was like South Park, X-Men, Matrix, Deep Blue Sea, and this.
and The Mummy.
That was it, ladies and gentlemen. That tells you everything you need to know about my movie taste at the age of 18 or 19. But George, we've mentioned his name a few times. How do we get this movie? You mentioned that this is a remake of sorts, made so long ago that it's not really a remake in my book.
So we have to put in the mandatory disclaimer that Charlie and I are not horror fans in the traditional sense. We do like the odd horror film, but we just don't have much knowledge. But Universal have a hold of, I think they have the rights, even though they're sort of based on sort of classic monsters. But yeah, they have the universal monsters. So there's Frankenstein, the Mummy, Dracula, the Wolfman, and there's a merman, a creature from the Black Lagoon, him too. So they made a bunch of horror films in the 30s, and they were very popular. They were seen as like classic, the original big. They weren't blockbusters back then, but the original big horror movies. And yeah, Universal have managed to keep the rights to them, or like the official rights to them.
Locked in a cave.
And then obviously there was in the 70s, I want to say, there was the Hammer horrors. And again, because I think maybe because it's out of copyright or whatever, but there was new takes on Dracula and the Mummy and Frankenstein. But the Mummy itself had been languishing for quite a while, and Universal were keen to revisit it as early as the reports say late 80s, but it was really the early 1990s they wanted to revisit some of the classic monsters, and they started with the Mummy. So they tasked two producers, James Jacks and Sean Daniel. They gave them a budget of 10 million and said, right, go and make us a Mummy movie. And at that point, it was just going to be, a low budget, straightforward horror movie. And that's a great thing about horror movies, as we've talked about in the past when we talked about Halloween. They're quite cheap to make, and they can pull in the punters because it's a great date night. Loads of those horny teens love a horror movie. So Universal had their eyes on creating a new low budget horror franchise, by revisiting the movie, and they managed to pull in some big horror directors. So first up was Clive Barker, the man behind Hellraiser series, and he worked up an idea that apparently was dark, sexual, and filled with mysticism. And James Jack said it would have been a great low budget movie. However, Universal got cold feet and felt ultimately it was too perverted. So I've just got on my notes, stop being sexy, Clive Barker.
Yeah.
Then it passed over to another sort of maestro of horror, George A. Romero from the Dawn of the Dead and Night of the Living Dead series. He was involved and worked up a script, and there was a couple, but he had to move on to a different project. And there was a couple of different takes, but following studio guidance, they basically wanted to make the Mummy a relentless Terminator-esque figure. And I suppose you could argue there are bits in this 1999 movie, it does feel a bit Terminator, he cannot be stopped sort of type thing.
When he's the skeleton bit, especially, yeah.
Yeah. At this point, we're at the mid-90s, and none other than Joe Dante came on board. He of Gremlins fame. John Sayles wrote a script. John Sayles is quite a famous horror, was like a writer and director. But this turned it into a tragic romance with a contemporary setting. That kind of fell apart, and it kind of went back to the drawing board. And Kevin Jarre, who we've talked about, he wrote Tombstone. He took it back to a period setting, and he must have done a fair bit of work on it because he ended up getting a story credit on this film. But then Stephen Sommers, who had done a couple of features, he'd done the first, I think, reboot of a Disney or live action retake of a Disney film. He did a Jungle Book adaptation in the mid-90s with Jason Scott Lee. And he then was working on the very fun action horror film Deep Rising, which you and I need to cover at some point. Whilst he was working on that, he heard that they were like, the Mummy they were trying to get it off the ground. And he'd always been a huge fan of the original 1930s film. It was one of the first films that terrified him as a kid. He'd heard that they'd parted ways with the latest writer-director. So he pitched it to the producers, and he said, one of the first things he said was, nobody wants to see a guy wrapped in bandages. They're going to laugh at it. And he described his vision as a kind of Indiana Jones or Jason and the Argonauts, with the Mummy as a creature giving the hero a hard time. He wanted the Mummy to be something faster, meaner, and a scarier monster. and Jim Jacks was like, the studio wants to do it for 15 million, and Stephen Summers was like, I'm going to need that for visual effects alone. So he was obviously pitching for a big budget, and I think I checked before. I think Deep Rising was a budget of around 45 million, so sort of mid level budget. But yeah, then the reason that they decided to, well, essentially in the background while all this was going on, Universal had a string of box office flops. So there was Babe 2, Pig in the City. Apparently that cost a lot and didn't make very much money. There was Virus with Jamie Lee Curtis, Meet Joe Black, Ed TV, which were all big budget, big movie star films that just didn't bring in the box office. So ultimately, Universal needed a hit, and they needed basically what we talked about, that recognizable IP, safe material. So they decided to greenlit Stephen Summers' vision with a budget of around 70 million, though Stephen Summers has said it was a bit lower. It was around 60 million.
But still, in terms of what they produce, I think they've done a great job. And you've mentioned it a few times there. Before we start talking about the film and the performances, let's talk about the VFX. The visual effects are, for me, there's probably one or two, maybe three things you're like, yeah, that looks a bit ropey. But the rest of it, given its setting, I think that's what carries it away. The rest of it, because like they do when they're doing like statues, skeletons, it's fine. It's like when they do like the weird smoke stuff, the sand and stuff, it's a bit forced.
Yeah, I think that's some of the most dodgy shots where it's like the ethereal like stuff coming off the water and taking the souls and stuff. That's a little bit ropey, but yeah, there is some great VFX in this, and it's 25 years old, this film, and it was really pushing the limits. And even ILM, who did, they must have been busy doing this and Phantom Menace at the same time, but they admitted they were like, they wanted to push their limits. They wanted to push what was done. They said they wanted to create a photorealistic corpse that was obviously not a guy in a suit, but obviously not an animatronic, and it was obviously alive. And I think that's it, as Stephen Summers says, if you had an animatronic or someone in a suit, people would laugh at it. It would be unintentional. It's the only way to do it, really.
Too much like Jason and the Argonauts, which you remember with a childhood love. So I feel, so no, I think it works well. I like how it builds. I think the effects look really good.
And again, there was some really interesting. I was watching. I can put this in the chat, but there's the VFX series on YouTube, Corridor Crew, where they get one of the head VFX guys to talk about it, and it is that stuff that you and I talk about in terms of, because it wasn't all CGI. Yeah, you had so that opening scene where it's showing ancient Egypt, there was miniatures, there was matte paintings, there was live in camera stuff, and it was all combined with a bit of CGI polish and lighting and stuff like that. And yeah, and even with the mummy, the design of the mummy, that was created as a mold, like a physical model, and then it was scanned in by ILM and animated there. So yeah, there was a lot of work, a lot of love and attention spent on the VFX. Yes, some of them are a little bit ropey, but as you say, for that budget, and nowadays it would easily be like, oh, it's 200 million.
But I understand why matte paintings have been replaced by better technology. We talked about that very clever stuff they do, which I think was pioneered for the Mandalorian.
Yes, the volume.
The volume shooting, where they can make it appear like anywhere without matte painting. But miniatures, I'm sorry, but like for me, the hybrid that you've got going on in this film works really well. When you've got miniatures and you've got a bit of CGI going on, your brain can't work it out. I think we were even talking about today. George shared with me the VFX of what they're doing, what they did on the recent Roadhouse film, the 2024 version, which we have covered on our Patreon. We'll try and get it on the blog. There's a very cool link explaining how they did the VFX in that film, and that was using physical effects, but cutting with CGI. Maybe not even CGI. I would say it's just editing.
Yeah, it's mostly editing. There might
It's
be a little
mostly
bit
editing. It's mostly
CGI
editing.
polish it, but to make the fight scene seem more realistic.
Again, hybrid, never one or
Mm.
the other. I think that's what 1999 taught us and how rubbery the Phantom Menace looks today. Anyway, back to the Mummy. What should we talk about? Should we get into the film? Should we talk a little bit about how it stands up today as a plot, as a motion picture?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Because for me, as you said, it's a four quadrant film. It ticks all of the boxes. It does all of them well. Takes you all over the place. We're on boats. We're in the air. We're underground. We're overground. We're in hotels. We're doing a car chase. I can't imagine the storyboarding in a film like this. It's nuts.
Well, that's the thing I kind of forget because I don't watch this film that often. I maybe watch it every few years. Because it is, it's a great blockbuster. But I do forget about the scope of it. It is really ambitious, as you say. It's not a sort of right. We'll get them to Hamunaptra, we'll get them to the city, and then they're trapped there. It's a fact. They go there, they leave, they have to go. They're in the city. There's all this stuff going on in the city, and then they have to get back.
Then they go on a
There's
boat. Then they're in
Yeah,
airplanes. Then they're underground again. Yeah,
yeah. There's a lot going on, and as you say, and I think credit to Stephen Summers. I think he was again, like we talked about with Indiana Jones, I think he storyboarded all the sequences out as he was working on the film, and that helped with the VFX as well because they knew what he wanted and what he was striving for. Um, but yeah, it's a really ambitious film, considering, he's essentially this is, the biggest film and biggest budget he's had. There's a lot of moving parts, and I think they did feel it was a bit of a cursed project whilst they were working on it, because they were working in, I think they had to film in Morocco, because there was like political issues in Egypt, so they couldn't film in Egypt, but they filmed in near Marrakesh, and just filming in the desert, there was like but people getting like stung and bitten, having to be airlifted for medical attention. There was sandstorms like ruining the sets. So I think there was quite a lot of challenges there. And then they filmed the rest of it in London. And there's actually, I was reading, there's some bits that, the bit where they're all out of the boat and they're on different sides of the river. That's actually filmed on the Thames. So it's obviously
wow.
it's inland. Obviously, it's not in central London, but because they filmed it at Shepperton Studios. So yeah, there's a lot of cool movie magic in there. But I was just saying to you when I was watching this, because Charlie and I sometimes sort of will text each other when we're doing our research, and I was like, I'm only 5 or 10 minutes in this movie, and it's already I'm feeling it's more enjoyable than at least the last two Indiana Jones films. Maybe even slight. I mean, it's some people might see this as blasphemy, but probably maybe even better than Temple of Doom.
It's up there with Doom, I would say.
Yeah.
I'd actually say it's because it's a bit more horror, a bit more leaning into it. It's at least to say it's as good as.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Fraser does a great role. As I say, not overly explained, not over the top.
Well, that's it. It doesn't really give him much of a backstory of like why he's there. He's like kind of like a mercenary, isn't he?
He's fighting at the beginning
Yeah.
with Benny, and like he's like, okay, so he's kind of a soldier sort of thing, and then he's like, but yeah, I think the chemistry between him and Rachel Weisz. But then again, when people say that, I kind of laugh because like I think if you're a young, hot-blooded male, it'd be difficult to have anything but chemistry for Rachel Weisz.
Well, that's it. I mean, I've got that in my notes as well. One,
Great
Brendan
actress. Sorry,
Well,
no respect where it's due.
no, but well, Brendan Fraser, let's go back to him first. He was such a movie star, and it's a real shame he kind of fell into obscurity for a decade or so. Obviously, he's come back big recently, and he's won an Oscar, which is fantastic. And I think there is a bit of like tragedy. I think there's some sort of abuse. Like I think he was abused by a producer or something like that, and that affected it. He was kind of blacklisted because I think he wanted to speak out about it. But yeah, I think there's some tragedy there, but he's back, and I think a lot of people have a lot of love for him. I saw some meme going around on Facebook saying, he should have been Superman. We should have had a Brendan Fraser Superman movie, in the 90s. He would have smashed it. And I think he did audition for when they were trying to get one of the Superman reboots off the ground. But he's a real movie star. Rachel Weisz, obviously, she's a lot more versatile, but yeah, she's fantastic in this. She's gorgeous, and they do have insane chemistry.
Yeah, you just think what beautiful babies they would make. And John Hannah, who is comic relief when overly used, but it works. It kind of works.
Yeah, I feel like there's a few sort of comic relief characters in this. You've got John Hannah, you've got Benny, you've got Omar Jalili's prison warden. Both Benny and the prison warden are on the drawing line between slightly racist and obviously
what happened to our smelly little friend back there?
Exactly, and he's just obsessed with money. And Ben, and they're all on the borderline of being almost too annoying, but they just get away with it. And obviously, Benny and the warden get their comeuppance in horrific deaths.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember John Hannah being a little bit, almost being a little bit too annoying, but I think it works well in the grand scheme of things. And there's a bit of slapstick that he brings to it as well.
And then you've got the knights of whoever, the guy.
Yes, the mysterious guardians. He must not be awoken.
Yeah, and he's definitely dead. And then at the end, he's like, I've made my own bandage out of some netting.
I thought it was a sequel.
Yeah,
and I think
exactly.
I think that's it. I think he was originally due to be killed off, and Stephen Summers was like, "Yeah," I was like, "No, if we're going to have a sequel, we've got to bring this guy back." So he's back for mysterious reasons. Sorry.
Got Imotep, the guy who turned up in Bosch. I've got to bring it back to Bosch somehow.
Everything, all roads lead back to Bosch.
Yeah, I was like, he turned up in Bosch. I was like, I've seen this guy.
But
I know this guy from somewhere. And yeah, he is a TV actor.
He's also in, Charlie, all the roads lead back to JCVD. He's also he's one of the bad guys in Hard Target. He's Lance Henriksen's right-hand man. So Arnold Vosloo.
Oh, right. Okay.
And I think the link is actually he got the role because I think Jim Jacks was one of the producers on this, was one of the producers of Hard Target as well.
You'd seen that he was one of the guys who was threatening her papa.
Your daddy, your papa.
Oh my God. Can we go back and review that film again?
I think he was one of the men that had to stand there awkwardly whilst Lance Henriksen aggressively played
violated that piano.
That poor piano. Anyway, go back to our Hard Target episode if you want to hear our thoughts on that. Great fucking movie.
So that's pretty much the cast. What else can be said about The Mummy? Great set pieces. For me, it ticks all the boxes. No complaints.
Yeah, I think it's great pace. It has got everything, and it does that balance of action, adventure, romance, and horror really well. And in a period setting, it's a real rarity. And I was thinking, obviously, we'll get onto it a little bit in suspicious spin-offs, but it's kind of like it's a shame that the sequels didn't manage to capture it as well. And I feel like in some ways, Pirates of the Caribbean kind of filled that void of, oh well, we've got horror, we've got adventure, we've got action, romance, and obviously with I can't believe that they're still making Pirates of the Caribbean. I think they're trying to get another one off the ground without Johnny Depp, I think. But
not possible.
They feel like diminishing returns. But yeah, I think it is a real lightning in a bottle, and I think Universal didn't expect it to be as big a hit. I think they were saying initially, because again, I think they had to move the release date to be before Phantom Menace. So I think it came out a couple of weeks before Phantom Menace.
Because when did Phantom come out? Because I mean, you saw on the trailer that it said May 7th. This was back in the day.
I think Phantom Menace came out, I want to say last weekend in May. So yeah, originally they predicted it was going to have a 20 million opening weekend, and it became the number one film in the US and Canada, grossing 43 million. So doubled what the predictions were. And then it would go on to it was the weekend take for the highest non-holiday May opening, the ninth biggest opening of all time. And then it fell to second place behind The Phantom Menace, but it would go on to gross 416 million worldwide. So that was big box office back then for 99. And in the summer of Star Wars, when you had the sleeper hit of The Matrix coming out, I think it really held its own because, as you say, it appealed to so many different people.
There was also The Spy Who Shagged Me.
That was the same because that was the great marketing film of if you go and see one film this summer, go and see Star Wars. If you go and see two, see Austin Powers.
Yeah. So yeah, it was that sort of summer. I can remember the disappointment and it was that. So yeah, there was some sleep. This and The Matrix were amazing surprises. So is there any coulda, woulda, shoulda on this?
There is.
Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
So coulda, woulda, shoulda is where George informs us about actors, sometimes directors, but mostly actors, actresses, even though they're all collectively actors, who were considered for certain roles in the film, but for whatever reason didn't get chosen. So who have we got in coulda, woulda, shoulda this time?
So I've talked about, obviously, we had some big horror directors in the mix, but there's one I left out. Actually, there's two I left out. One of them was the master of horror, Wes Craven. He was offered it and turned it down. And I think at some point, Sam Raimi, I wouldn't be surprised if I said there's a connection to Hard Target, which Sam Raimi produced as well. So Sam Raimi was involved, but then couldn't do it for whatever reason. So that was from a director's point of view. And apparently, just to jump back when I was talking about the Joe Dante version, which part of me, we love Joe Dante's movies. They always have a bit of tongue in cheek, but the part of me that wants to, see the Joe Dante. And when he was talking about it, it was going to be a tragic romance. But he wanted Daniel Day-Lewis as the Mummy in his version.
Okay.
However, the main coulda, woulda, shoulda I've got is for the lead, Rick O'Connell. And the four names that were touted before they landed on Brendan Fraser were none other than Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, Matt Damon, and if you're getting Matt Damon, is Ben Affleck available? But Stephen Summers always says that Brendan Fraser was his first choice.
You missed a trick there. You could have done da-da-da-da-da-da and Matt Damon.
Matt Damon.
Okay.
So yes, obviously Tom Cruise went on.
Not yet. Not yet. I'm not ready. Come back.
He's not ready.
Come back later, Tom.
Apparently, with Rachel Weisz's character, there was a lot of American actresses who auditioned for the role. I haven't got any details of who exactly, but she had to audition for the role 4 times before getting it. And I think the studio realized that she had insane chemistry with Brendan Fraser. So
Brendan Fraser, I'm still not sure. Get her back. Not sure. Get her back. Full costume. Do the nighttime scene. Scene again.
Maybe I should kiss her again.
Yeah.
So yes, there we have coulda, woulda, shoulda. But shall we briefly move on to suspicious?
That's
spin-offs?
easy for you to say, buddy. Why did we call it suspicious spin-offs? It was so difficult to say.
I haven't even been drinking tonight. Suspicious spin-offs.
Yeah, it's pretty easy just to make fun of it. So it is exactly what it sounds like. Do we need to explain what suspicious spin-offs is? God, I'm struggling with it now.
Well, it's usually have they spun off have there been spin-offs, have there been sequels, have there been remakes? So obviously this started a couple of franchises. So there was the original Mummy trilogy. So they very quickly, in some ways, you could say Universal rushed out The Mummy Returns, which, because of the success of this film, had a lot of hype behind it. It's been a while since I watched that, but most people remember The Mummy Returns because it's got some of the worst CGI in it for one of the Rock's first appearances when he turns into this Scorpion King thing. And he looks like a PS2 character.
It's still I see it still popping up in memes today.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
how bad it is. Yeah.
So yeah, that came out, I think in 2001. And then there was a bit of a hiatus, and then the Mummy, The Tomb of the Dragon Emperor came out, I want to say 2008. So that was so I think obviously the Mummy Returns was a classic. Let's bring everyone back, and add in The Rock. And they have a very annoying son, for reasons, because it's a bit of a time jump. But yes, the Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, I haven't seen it. Have you seen it?
No,
That's
I thought the third one was called The Scorpion King.
No, so they did a spin-off series of The Scorpion King. So The Scorpion
Series
King,
or film?
there's a film, but then there's a bunch of direct to DVD sequels to The Scorpion King that don't have The Rock in. So there's effectively two franchise. There's a Mummy franchise trilogy, and I think there's a Scorpion King trilogy. But The Rock is only in one of them.
Because I don't know about anything you're talking about. I remember it as being Mummy Returns, and Scorpion King, and I'm no longer interested.
So yeah, there was a bit of a gap, and then in 2008 they brought out the Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, which had So Hot in the Noughties, Jet Li.
I was just going to shout Jet Li.
Jet Li, and the script was so bad that Rachel Weisz refused to come back, so they had to recast Rachel Weisz, and it was Maria Bello, I think, was cast in it, and unsurprisingly, it didn't do big. It did okay, I think, in terms of box office, but it didn't have the numbers that Universal were looking for. But apparently, from doing my research, they were working. I think before the third one came out, they were working on a fourth idea, which was going to involve the Aztecs, and the mummy in that one was going to be none other than Antonio Banderas. And I would watch the shit out of that. But you've just, Antonio Banderas' mummy, shut up and take my money.
Yeah, I mean, just even appearing in the Mummy. Is he the Mummy? I don't care. I've already bought my ticket.
So there's rumors I think, floating about that because Brendan Fraser is back off his Oscar win from The Whale, I think it was last year or the year before. There's this talk of the fact that everyone won't let things go, and we've had reunions of certain films and belated sequels. Everyone's like, oh well, they're going to do The Mummy 4, but
John Hannah's still alive. Rachel Weisz is still alive. Yeah, come on, let's do it. He can lose some weight.
I think that ship has sailed. I don't want.
What would it be about? What would it be about?
Well, I think even the Tomb of the Dragon Emperor has their son so they have a son in The Mummy Returns.
I don't care.
And then in the third one, he's an adult. So it's just like, again, like Pirates of the Caribbean, let's just pass on the torch and let's get people. So yes, I feel like the ship has sailed, and it indeed it has sailed, because Universal would go on to, instead of doing a fourth film, would reboot The Mummy again with one of the biggest movie stars, one of the last remaining movie stars, Tom Cruise. And how could that film fail?
It worked for Reacher, right?
So we will be covering on our Patreon this month. We are going to be delving into the 2017 Tom Cruise Mummy movie.
Because it's the only way that George has been able to convince me to watch this film. So
it's true. It's true. So yes, if you're interested in hearing Charlie and I's thoughts on the Tom Cruise Mummy, feel free to sign up to our Patreon subscription. We've got some other great stuff in there as well. We've got lots of first-time watchers from stuff like the original Roadhouse, The Warriors, and other things like Halloween. Did we do?
I think we must have about 10 or 20 bonus episodes to check out.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of recent releases as well. We did the new Roadhouse, as Charlie touched on earlier. So yes, there's a bunch of extra retro ramble for the price of a small coffee every month.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else you want to say about the Mummy, or do you want to talk about? Well, obviously we're covering the Mummy 2017. I'm just trying to think, is there a funny way to talk about that? The Tommy, maybe. The one with Tom Cruise. No,
yeah, I was
no,
trying to do some sort of a pun with the
No.
MI mummy, but it just doesn't really work.
They didn't come up
Mummy
with
Impossible. Let's call it Mummy Impossible.
Mummy Impossible. There you go. That's
Yeah.
what you're paid for.
Exactly.
Okay.
I used to be in advertising.
Uh,
used to be. KG used to be.
So that's definitely a recommendation when it comes to this version of The Mummy.
Well, I had so much fun watching this. I am tempted to go back and watch The Mummy Returns, even though I know it does fall apart like wet pieces of cake at the end.
It's about as useful as a car full of chips. I feel the need for more 90s. That's what I feel like. Because obviously, I think, as I said to George, and maybe it was apparent, when we did the Ewoks, was that for Patreon? That was
yes.
For Patreon.
We did the shit Ewok movie.
I was not impressed with that, and so I feel like I need some. The quality of it is what I mean. I enjoyed doing the podcast with you, brother, but no, I was not impressed with the. So I want to do some high quality 80s, especially coming off the back of such a hot piece of 90s.
We didn't even mention, like, as I said to you in a text, how 90s is this movie. Even though it's set in the 30s, you've got dual pistols, the John Woo effect, diving around, firing two pistols.
Never running out of ammo. Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unless it's part of the plot point. Shotguns.
Indeed.
And then there's a point where the sexy ninja assassin guy is just walking around, the Arab guy, just like with a helicopter, like an enormous machine gun. Have you seen this?
Oh, yeah.
You're just like, yeah, I'll take him out. And
I'll take care of this.
Cannot be killed by mortal weapons, but I'm just going to use... I'm the one who told you that, but I'm going to use the machine gun anyway.
Use the dynamite.
Yeah. So, yeah, a lot of fun. A lot of fun to revisit this movie. This is why we do the podcast, films like this.
Yes.
Okay, so for this episode, I have been Charlie McGee.
I've been George McGee.
And we'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.